I was talking.
Okay, okie dokie. So we're back. This is part 2 of the video that I started filming before. If you are just tuning in or just seeing this video, make sure you watch the first part so you get the whole gist of where we are, so you can pick up where you left off.
Well, what I was saying is how all of us who went off to college came back, and we were trying to start a movement in St. Augustine, and there was a college there, but the college was closed, So the white folks in the town were shocked. They didn't have any idea that they thought that we were happy. I know that when I went back to Florida after being gone almost 30 years, I interviewed a woman who had lived through that period, this white woman, and she said to me that she knew that she said, the better class of white people here knew things were going to have to change. She said, and she thought that for the most part, the change had been for the better. She said, however, I have one regret. And she started looking very sad, and I said, well, what is that? She said, ever since Dr. Martin Luther King came through here, the beloved Southern Negro seems to have just disappeared. But see, the beloved Southern Negro was a fiction of their imagination. You understand what I'm saying? But in any case, they were shocked when we started an uprising in St. Augustine. And my grandfather told me one day, because this is a small town, word gets around, he told me one day, he said, listen, boy, he said, the way things are going here, either you're going to end up killing one of these Peckerwoods or one of them going to end up killing you. And in any case, whatever, you got to get this whole family into a war with these crackers, because whatever they do to you, they do to all of us, So, because we come from a family of ass-kicking blacks, and I'll talk about that when I talk about our family, you understand what I'm saying? And my grandfather was a deacon who believed in, praise the Lord and keep the powder dry. He had guns all over. So anyway, between that and the fact that my girlfriend, whom I was deeply in love with, had kicked me to the curb, she had gone to Atlanta and fallen in love with some dude who was, about to become certain to be a doctor, and I learned about it in a most unceremonious fashion, and between being kicked out of school, losing a girlfriend, now, my grandfather concerned about my safety, all these things I had taken to the bottle. I started drinking. I mean, I was a Dudley Do-Right. I never did anything, I started drinking, and was about to fall into the ranks of the town drunks when my mother decided that I needed to be taught a lesson, and so she packed up and she left, and so I was floundering around there, and I decided I needed to she came back to Philadelphia with my younger sister, and so yes, but you see, this is very important, you understand, because this is what caused me to go into the Strategic Air Command, which is when my life began to change. When I came out of the Strategic Air Command, I was a radical, right? When I went into Strategic Air Command, I was just confused, somewhat demoralized, and that cannot be understood without understanding what my experience was in Florida, And I left there, when I left there, I was pretty much brokenhearted one night. I joined the Air Force for 2 reasons. Number one, the town that I lived in, one of the professions that you could really move ahead in was the military, especially if you were an officer. And there was all of these black colleges had ROTC programs, where you could become an officer. And my next door neighbors, they had 5 kids. They all went off to Florida A&M, and there were people all over town. There were seeing black men walking around with officers' bars from the United States military in my town was a rather commonplace sight. My Uncle Jimmy was a decorated combat officer from World War II, fought in the Pacific. So they had told me that the military, Truman had integrated the military, during the Korean War. And so they had told me, I listened to these people that in the military, there was no segregation, and that in the military you could rise based upon your merit. So I thought, well, as long as I don't have to do no fighting. So I joined the Air Force. Rather than, I had friends who were in the airborne and Marines or no. I joined the Air Force because I wasn't going to be flying any planes, fighter planes. So I figured, I'd go through basic training and then I'd get a job, just go and get a job. But I went into the Air Force, and it really changed my life radically, from the time that I entered basic training. Because in basic training, the first thing they do when you get to the base is they cut all of your hair off. They take your civilian clothes. They give everybody the same set of green fatigues, what they call government issue, and they give you some dog tags that have your name, rank, and serial number that you are never to take off. Is if you get killed in battle, that's how they identify who you are. And you begin to, and they begin to put you through this rigorous training system, changing you from what they used to call a slovenly, candy-ass civilian into a warrior, into a soldier, and it was a rigorous process. I think that it's good training for young people if you don't have to actually go to war, because it teaches you a whole different kind of level. I mean, I was down in San Antonio, Texas, which is almost like being in Mexico. There were so many Mexicans there because it was once a part of Mexico. I didn't see a lot of it because I was in a unit with a bunch of screw-ups, and so we didn't really get any opportunities to go to. Every time we were about to get a pass to go to town, it got canceled because somebody screwed up. However, I had the two people who made the greatest impression on me. One was Mexican, he was a drill sergeant, and he had a very wry sense of humor, and he took almost sadistic pleasure in seeing these guys who came in there overweight and out of shape, and he would put them through these rituals.
So even though I know all this stuff is relevant, you have told me this story before. You've told me before how you've gotten, at least to Philly and Queen Mother Moore in less than an hour and 15 minutes. So I'm just saying, I just want you to, maybe you can go back and tell some of it.
No, I'm going to tell the story the way I want to tell it.
Okay.
All right?
Okay.
Because it's impossible to understand with my transformation without understanding this. Right?
No, I've understood. No, but I'm saying some of the things.
Yeah, you heard it, but other people.
No, but I'm saying.
Record.
But what I'm saying, when I've heard it though, I've heard it without. I just feel like it's a lot of excessive stuff that you don't need to say right now that maybe you can come back to because it's already been like an hour and 15 minutes and you haven't. So I'm just saying, I don't know. But go ahead. Like sometimes it's just like when with writing, and the editor has to come in and edit stuff. Like when someone does a documentary, you can't put everything in it. So I'm just saying, like.
Well, the editor edits after the fact, so you have the tape if you want to edit.
Yeah,
you
no,
can
but
edit it
sometimes, but even if you're speaking, like if somebody told you that we want you to come speak about this, and you have 45 minutes, you couldn't say. I mean, like I don't want to go 2 hours, and we're still like you have to edit when you're speaking how much detail you're going to give about certain things.
If you had a time limit, I would have done an outline.
Well, no, I'm just saying. No, I'm just saying right now. Some of the
it's
things.
Just a free-form conversation.
I know, but I'm saying when you're having a free-form conversation, sometimes you yourself, like when I'm talking about certain things, I have to edit out certain things at the moment you don't need to go into at the moment. So I'm just saying you don't have to go in super depth with everything. I'm just saying. Go ahead.
I'm internationally renowned for my storytelling abilities.
Yeah, but this is an hour and 15 minutes, and we're still okay. Go ahead. Like I don't need to know about the Mexican that trained the fat people, but I'm just saying, go ahead. Just go ahead. I'm not going to try to interrupt you again, but I'm just saying. I'm just trying to keep you on the point, because there's so many different sub-things you can go up on, and sometimes it's relevant and important, but sometimes it doesn't need to be said right now. That's all I'm saying. But go ahead. I don't want to mess up your... Go ahead. So you were in the military. Okay. Somebody said they're enjoying the story. I'm not going to interrupt you anymore. Go ahead.
Well, I'm about to retire.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So... what I'm describing is the process by which you come into this organization as a regular person and emerge as a soldier, all right? When I came out of this training, they sent me right into the heart of the American Nuclear Strike Force, okay? Just a few months earlier, I had been going through atomic bomb drills in school, where they would have these simulated atomic bomb drills at the height of the Cold War. They used to do that. They'd have these drills where you would practice what to do if there was an atomic attack, which is that I later found out was bullshit. You understand what I'm saying? None of that stuff would save you in an atomic attack. But at the time, they had us thinking that was the case. In any case, when I left, see, because my radicalization began in basic training. You know, I mean, several things happened. You know, for one thing, this was 1960. And even though the armed forces were integrated, when we came into basic training, these Southern crackers were Southern crackers. You know, they came right out of the segregated Southern South. We had never been around each other before. You know, we'd never been around them, they'd never been around us. They had all their racist attitudes and whatnot, and we had to deal with that. And the way that we dealt with it in this remarkable training that they put us through was they took a simple position. You know, they said there is a civilian way of doing things. There is a right and wrong way of doing things, and there is the military way of doing things. You are now in this man's army. You will do it the military way. You will do it our way. And their position is that you are all soldiers now. Whatever you were, you're all soldiers now. You know, and we have to be a unified fighting force. And anybody who got problems, you know, getting along with anybody else in here, well, you know, we are warriors. We're training to be warriors. You got a problem, you can't get along, then go get the boxing gloves. They would go get the boxing gloves, and the sergeants and stuff would start taking bets on who was going to get their ass kicked. After we busted up a few of these rednecks, they began to behave themselves. You understand? They began to see, you know, that when they didn't have the advantage, when we weren't outnumbered, you know, we were as good a men as them and better in many instances. In my case, I had the master sergeant, the one who was over all the other sergeants, was a redneck cracker from South Carolina. But mind you now, this is the military. His unit gets graded based upon the performance of his troops. And we used to have what they would call white glove inspections, where the officer of the day would come around to a barracks and put on a white linen glove and go stick his hand all under the radiator and all under the beds. And if he got one speck of dust on that glove, the whole unit got confined to the barracks. So this was all an exercise in discipline, you know, detail. You know, now when this officer came around, one of the members of the group would have to escort him. And this officer might turn around to the person who's escorting him and say, "What is Article 4, Section 2 of the UCMJ soldier, the Unified Code of Military Justice soldier?" And if you couldn't answer this question, then the group got so many demerits. This redneck sergeant with deep Southern drawl, he assembled them before we had our first white glove inspection. He said, "Listen, I'm going to appoint Benjamin to accompany the officer, because he's the smartest one of you suckers in here, and I know if anybody would be able to answer the question that the officer might ask, he's the one." Now this was a white Southerner, you know, in a group with, you know, the majority of people in the group were white Southerners, and I had never experienced anything like that before. You know, it was quite a revelation. You know, I had always been told that I was exceptionally smart in my black schools, but now this was the first time I had ever competed with white boys. You know, and he picked me and said, you know, he's the smartest one in here. So that had quite an effect on me. Now, when we got out of basic training, I was assigned to the Strategic Air Command. The Strategic Air Command was the main American nuclear strike force. This is how the United States would deliver nuclear weapons. I was assigned to a base up on what was called the DEW line, the Distance Early Warning Line. It was up near Saskatchewan, near Western Canada. And it was called the Distance Early Warning Line because in the case of a nuclear attack from the Soviet Union, from the Russians, we would be the first to detect it. We would be the first line of defense. And this was a base that had fighter squadrons on it, but it also had B-52 intercontinental strato bombers. That's the ones that delivered the strategic nuclear weapons, the nuclear weapons that would destroy the world. Now, I didn't know anything about the Strategic Air Command, and of course, when you're in basic training, they don't tell you anything until you get ready to go, and they give you your orders. When you get your orders, it tells you where to report to, and you will find out what the command is about when you get there. So when I got there, the first day, that I was there, we had this orientation session, and this colonel ran, and he came in, and he told us this was the Strategic Air Command. He told us that the mission of our base was the nuclear destruction of the Soviet Union. Now I'm 18 years old. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, I'm sitting there, and then he shows us a film. The film is a film of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. Now, you've seen films of this on television or what have you, but not like the films he had. These were the Strategic Air Command's, personal films, and they showed this bombing from angles and devastation from angles and stuff that you wouldn't see it otherwise, especially when he has got his point up there and he's pointing it out to us what's happening. This was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. And then, when it was over, he cut on the lights, and he laughed. And he says, oh, these bombs are like firecrackers compared to the ordnance we have on this base. And he proceeded to tell us about the difference between the explosive capacity and radiation of the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the bombs we were prepared to drop on Russia. The bombs they dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, he explained, was equivalent to 20,000 tons of high explosives, TNT. The bombs we had on the base, some of them were equivalent to 100 megatons. That's 100 million tons of TNT. It was mind-boggling. At the end of it, at the end of my first session, I thought that I had fallen in the grasp of madmen. I thought these people are crazy. This is madness. And I still think it's madness. I've never changed my mind about it. However, I was in there. I was trained to believe that if a certain scenario developed, we would have to use our weapons to keep them from destroying us with theirs. So I was programmed in such a way where I would have done whatever I had to do to see that the mission succeed. That's why when people tell me, when I talk to people, and they tell me they don't believe a nuclear war can happen, they tell me, oh, nobody's going to do that because they know, they're going to be. That's if you take any kind of solace in that, if you take any kind of sense of security in that, I'm telling you, you're living in a dream world, especially now. Because when I was in there, these weapons were delivered by bombers, whereas you could get the bombers in the sky and find out you made a mistake and have an opportunity to turn them around. Now this stuff is all done with intercontinental ballistic missiles, and they can be fired from all kinds. They can be fired from the air, they can be fired from beneath the ground, they can be fired from the surface of the sea, they can be fired from under the sea, and they're computerized. And once they start firing, it ain't no stopping them. It's going to be the end of the world. That's why the Ukraine situation is so dangerous. So that was the situation I found myself in. Not only that, but I was out in the Great Plains of Montana. So for the first time, I had a chance to see the Plains Indians. Now, I had gotten a glimpse of the situation when I was taking a plane from San Antonio, Texas, up to Glasgow, Montana, all the way out in the Great Plains. Well, in those days, they had prop planes, the planes with the whirling propellers. When the plane I was on started going over the Rocky Mountains, they started hitting air pockets. That was something where the planes would drop, just suddenly drop, hit these dead air, and it was like the plane was falling out of the sky. It scared me so bad that when we landed in Cheyenne, Wyoming, I got off and said, I'm not getting back on the plane, you know, and that's the end of it for me. And I took a bus from Cheyenne, Wyoming up to Glasgow, Montana. And on the way, I went through the Little Bighorn where General Custer made his last stand. We was wiped out, you know, by the Indians. And I was standing on this valley. It's a point of interest, so they stopped so you can see it and pay your respects. And all these white folks was crying. And I'm looking at all these white graves, grave marks, and I'm thinking, now I started in St. Augustine, Florida. This is where white folks started in this country. It's the nation's oldest city. And they got Indian burial grounds in St. Augustine, Florida. The community that I grew up in used to be an Indian village. And I'm thinking now, they have pushed the Indians all the way from St. Augustine, all the way out here. I'm looking around, this looked like something out of a cowboy movie, all these mountains and plains. And I said, I remember distinctly thinking, so they didn't even want to let the Indians have this. And I began to think, I began to sympathize with them. I began to think, you know, no wonder they white cussed out. You understand what I'm saying? They'd had enough. That was clear to me. I had a completely different response to it than the white folks. So then, when I got actually stayed out, I lived out there, you know, for over a year. And I got a chance to really see the way that Native Americans were treated. You know, and the thing that struck me about it is that they had the air of a defeated people. I mean, I came from the Deep South, came from, you know, a segregated system, but black folk had a you know, like a vim and vigor. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, look at our culture, look at our music, you know, look at our dances, you know, and we were beginning to rise in a vigorous movement against it. The Native Americans, the Plains Indians, that kind of like that, they just looked defeated. They looked defeated, and they had serious problems with alcoholism and what have you, but it was observing the position of Native Americans that made me a radical. That's what started me down the course to becoming a radical. I thought, if they could do this to them, they could do the same thing to us. If they had a mind to, you know. And I saw just how dangerous, you know, white folks could be when I saw the way that they had treated, you know, Native Americans. Now, at the same time, I'm here dealing with these bombs, you know. I'm with some people here now who are getting ready to blow up the world. And so, in the midst of this, there was a black sergeant, a black master sergeant on the base. And now, mind you now, we were getting along with these white folks, these white boys who would come in and serve, but all of them had not changed their mind. You know, I ended up having an incident with them which caused me to be disarmed, and I'll talk about this in a minute. But the thing is that my first sergeant, this black first sergeant, said to me one day, he said, you know, these white boys, they think they're so superior, you know, but they ain't all that. You understand? He said, you know, they lie about their history a whole lot. And he said, here, take this book, read this book. And he gave me a booklet called, it was like an extended pamphlet called, it had a softback cover. It was called 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro with Complete Proof by J. Rogers. I read it, and it just inflamed my imagination. It just opened my mind. Well, Rogers had written 10 volumes of books. The World's Great Men of Color, Volumes 1 and Volume 2. Sex and Race, 3 volumes. Nature Knows No Color Line, multi-volume work. Africa's Gifts to America. And then this remarkable book, From Superman to Man, which was a book about a black, it was a novel about a black waiter on a train, you know, a Pullman car waiter, who got in an argument with this white supremacist, you know, who he was waiting on. And they got into this argument about, the title of the book was From Superman to Man. When it started out, the white boy thought he was Superman. But when he got through with this conversation with this waiter, who was citing all kinds of stuff about the history of the world, about ancient history, about, you know, and just shut this guy up. By the time they got through the end of the book, the guy was tongue-tied. And I thought, you know, is this all true? You know? And so I became obsessed with checking all of Rogers's footnotes and what have you. And he kept referring to this place in Harlem called the Schomburg Collection. He kept referring to the Schomburg Collection as a place where you could find a lot of the source material. So now, I got an early discharge. I got what is known as a convenience of the government discharge under honorable conditions. Here's what happened. We used to play war games out there. We had we would do different kinds of duty. Like, I was in a unit called Combat Defense. The unit I was in had responsibility for maintaining all of the security on the base. That is, the securing the flight line, where the bombers were, and where the fighter interceptors were. It meant securing MMS, which was Munitions Maintenance Service. That's where all the actual nuclear bombs were stored. It meant securing a CSC, Central Security Control. Central Security Control was the nerve center where they would direct the nuclear war fighting. This is where they had the red and the blue phones, where you could pick up a blue phone and every SAC base in the world would go on alert. You could pick up the red phone and give an order to every SAC base in the world to attack. We were less than an hour from Russia across the Arctic Circle. And it was a very paranoid situation. They had us thinking, they would say, for all we know, the Ruskies could have launched 40 minutes ago, you know. In the next 5 minutes, we'd be blown to smithereens. They'd say stuff like that. And they had these signs around, you know, with the Russian premier, Khrushchev, who incidentally was a Ukrainian. And he had made a speech at the United Nations, and he pointed to the American ambassador and said, "We will bury you." And a photographer had caught that post, and they made a post of it. And everywhere we looked, these big posters of Khrushchev saying, "We will bury you." And so it was a paranoid existence. And when they would put us out on distant perimeter, this was a special kind of duty, where they would take us and put us a couple of miles off base. Now, we out in the wilderness, you know, Montana. And I remember the first time we went out there, the commander said, you're going to be dispatched to the Badlands. Gentlemen, he said, that means that everything out here is poisonous or will eat you. And then he said, but don't worry, because you are the most dangerous animal in the forest, because we had all these weapons and whatnot. They would tell you what to do if you encountered a grizzly bear, you know, or a mountain lion. So I'm out here with these two white boys, and they used to play war games. They would try to penetrate your post, and if you caught them, they would cut on the lights and say, all right, you know, and what have this, us. So I'm out there with these white boys. We out there in the dark, out here looking for Russian saboteurs now. You know, we on the equivalent of a search and destroy mission for Russian saboteurs who are trying to sabotage our atomic strike base here. So I'm out there with these two crackers, and one of them was from Arkansas and one of them was from Mississippi. So one of them says to the other, "What's a good white gentleman where you come from?" And the guy answers, he said, "A white man who fucking nigga woman all night long but wouldn't sit by a brother at the football game the next day." That's what he said. I pulled my weapon on him. I disarmed them. I made them lay down in the ground, and I was trying to make up my mind whether I was going to blow their fucking heads off when the officer in charge showed up on the scene. He begged me to put my gun down. His name was Lieutenant Geracioni. I never will forget it. He was an Italian from New York. Italian from Brooklyn. He was from the Bronx. And he was a swarthy Italian. So he had been through this with these rednecks, and he knew right away what had happened when I explained. That's the reason that I didn't get court-martialed. Because him and then the officer in charge, Captain Kaufman, he was Jewish. And he was from New York too. The Italian was from the Bronx, and the Jewish captain was from Brooklyn. And both of them had their problems with rednecks
Hold on, I'm writing it. Somebody let me know if you can still hear me. Can you go? Yeah, the video is glitching. Okay, we're gonna restart it over. I'm gonna restart it.
From the beginning?
No,